Dear visitors, welcome to Anarres. By entering this room, you have been transported to the Tau Ceti star system and landed on the moon planet Anarres, which orbits the very Earth-like Ures. The Tau Ceti star system is 12 light years from Earth. It will take more than 9 million years to travel there by car, if you drive very fast. Ures is a planet of nation-states who govern according to similar principles like your beloved Earth and value similar things like the right to earn money and spend it in all sorts of commodities, houses, cars and jewelry. And like Earth, some of the people on Ures are incredibly rich and powerful and live amazingly well, while a great deal of other people live in terrible conditions and are exploited. One day, some people on Ures decided they wanted a society with no dominant governing forces to tell them what to do, with no hierarchies or rules or systems of control. They wanted to live freely and equally. These people called themselves Anarchists and followed the writings of an amazing woman called Odo, who rallied them and staged a number of protests. But instead of fighting them, the government of Ures agreed to let them live on the moon Anarres and establish their society there. So here we are. Anarres is very similar to Earth's moon, although it has a slightly more hospitable atmosphere. The air is very thin, like when you are at the top of a very high mountain, and the gravity is less heavy than Earth's. Practically, the entire surface of Anarres is an arid desert, where it's very dry, cold and windy. Anarres is geologically unstable, and earthquakes are frequent. Because of Anarres' unique geology, conditions are harsh and just few life forms have managed to evolve on the planet. Most were imported from Ures when the first anarchist colonies were formed. As seen here, the most prolific species of plant and the primary source of nutrition for the Anarresti is the holum plant. Full of spines and needles, the stubborn holum is able to survive on very little water. Every part of the holum is used by the Anarresti. Its leaves and seeds are used to cook with, and its fibers and roots are woven to provide the 20 million inhabitants with clothing. The Anarresti live in very different ways from you and I. They self-organize as a series of local cooperatives, and most decisions, no matter how trivial, are made by local groups known as syndicates. Amazingly, Anarres does not have an economy. There is nothing to buy, as everything that you need is provided by the syndicates. Because there is nothing to buy, there is also nothing to own. Ownership of any kind simply does not exist. One of the consequences of nothing being possessed or owned is there is nothing of value to steal. Because every person on Anarres has exactly as much as the next person, there is no inequality and no jealousy. This means that there is no need for rules of law, and as a result, there is no authority and no legal system, no punishments and no prisons. Computers are programmed to assign people jobs and daily tasks. You might, for example, be asked to work for 3 months in the mineral mines below the harsh mountains of Netera, or get sent to care for Anarresti children in one of the many nurseries in the beautiful capital city of Abenai. The Anarresti go about their work with much pride and happiness. In their language, the words work and play are the same. Anarres has its own language. It is called Pravic. Pravic has no way to say you own something. There is no mine, no yours, his, hers, its or theirs. You cannot have things in Pravic, and on Anarres you cannot buy things or sell them. Calling someone an owner is a big insult. It is even difficult to say I, me, or you in Pravic. You call yourself the person speaking, and the person you're talking to is the person listening. So you cannot say my code. You have to say the code is the responsibility of the person speaking. Unlike English, Pravic pays more attention to doing things than to the person doing them. You do not say Shevek made a tasty dessert. You say a tasty dessert was made by Shevek. Pravic reflects an anarchist way of seeing the universe. It rejects ownership of all types. Even ideas belong to everyone. This makes its speakers think differently about themselves and others, and about the world they live in. We hope you enjoyed our short tour of Anarres and look forward to welcoming you as a brother or sister in the near future. The listeners are thanked for attentions.
Right, welcome to this, the first of 10 Paths to Utopia events here at King's College. My name's Neil Denny of Little Atoms radio show and magazine. I'm going to be hosting 9 out of the 10 of these events. And tonight we're going to visit night school on Anarres, as you'll have just seen from that short video. I'm just going to briefly introduce you to the 3 people directly to my left, to your right. At the far end, Dr. Martin Edwards, who's a linguist, then animator and designer Nesta Pestana next to him, and Namoon Zimmerman, who's an artist, next to me. And I should also mention Noam Turan, Onka Kular, and Dr. Simon Coffey, who also worked on this project. I'm going to ask, starting with Martin, for you 3 to introduce yourselves briefly, and mainly how you got involved in this project.
Okay, I'm Martin Edwards. I work at King's College in the linguistic area, and the linguistics department basically got involved in creating the language Pravic, which is defined in the book The Dispossessed, Ursula Le Guin's book. And that's the basis on which a large part of this project is based.
My name is Nesta Pestana. I graduated last year from the Royal College of Art in the Design Interactions program, and that's how I met artists Onka Kular and Noam Turan. They asked me to get involved within the project as a collaborator later from its start. So there was already a conceptual base built. So basically, my role, very briefly, was to help develop the concept further together with them.
I'm Namoon Zimmerman. I also graduated last year from Royal College of Art, but from the Design Products course. And Onka Kular was my tutor there. And so basically, I'm a social engaged designer, and I'm leading quite a lot of workshops for children. So that's how I got into this program. So I'm leading basically the children's workshop in the night school of Anarres.
And Martin, give us we've seen the video, but give us just a brief overview of what the project is, what it does.
Well, obviously, it's part of the Paths to Utopia, and so the idea is to look at a utopian environment, and the environment we chose was Anarres, which is set out in The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. It's an anarchistic planet, and Ursula Le Guin doesn't pull any punches. She shows how it can work and how it doesn't necessarily work. And the whole book is about this conflict between the bits that work, the bits that people want, and the bits that don't work, and the bits that individuals don't want. I do recommend you read it. One of the key things in the text is the language Pravic, which is said in the text to be designed so that it's difficult to produce unanarchistic utterances. So that was the task that we had in the linguistics department, because Ursula Le Guin gives us only some clues as to how Pravic works. So we had to basically flesh out the whole language from the few clues she's given us. And that's what we did. And we also produced a second language, which is Pravic, which is a cross between Pravic and English. Basically, it's English, but the word order and the thought order is done in the order for Pravic.
So, Namun, I'll ask you this, as you work with Anka and Nesta's joined the project latterly, where did the seeds of this idea come from? When obviously this Paths to Utopia project was being put together, do you know how far back this idea was?
Actually, I'm not really sure, but he was my tutor, Anka, so he kind of repeatedly talked about Dispossessed and this book about like Ursula Le Guin, where like genders are kind of non-existing. Everyone is equal basically on Anarres, and he was like, because my project was about gender stereotypes, it kind of forced me into like thinking in this way. I guess this like the seed between Anka and Noam to make this project has happened like years.
A year ago, at least a year ago. Yeah.
So Nesta, tell us something about that amazing animation that we watched at the beginning of the project.
Yeah. So basically, I was responsible to create all the 2D materials for the installation, and to come up with engaging ways. In ways to engage the public with the installation itself and the dynamics that happen within the installation, like the lesson plans that Namun and Dr. Martin are leading. So some of the ideas were to come up with different teaching resources that could be used to engage pupils in the lesson plans. So the animation is one of them. So it's basically 7 minutes where you have hand-draw illustrations and a simple explanation for these students or visitors coming to the workshops or the lesson plans. There were some decisions made, like for example, why did we use hand draws instead? Because it could be 3D, illustrations. But I think there's something about hand drawing something. There's errors. There's richness about the act of drawing by hand that will be lost if we did something a little bit more digital based. And also, by the time that the book was written, and this was in the 70s, we didn't have computers. So we wanted to be consistent with that. And that's why it has this sort of look to it.
Yeah, and flippantly, can you also be more anarchic if you're hand drawing the animations?
The what, sorry?
More anarchic.
Yeah, exactly. It has, again, I think this freedom, it gives this more anarchistic way of expressing and assuming errors and taking these errors as as part of the process.
How long did it take?
So I was working for 4 weeks, just doing different things, but my priority was just the animation itself. So animating took 4 weeks, doing all the illustrations, because as you can see, they are really detailed, so I had to draw line by line, so that takes time. it took perhaps 2 months, I would say, the whole thing. But obviously there was already some work done, like before doing the animation I had to, come up with what sort of colors, although they are very straightforward. If you think about anarchist and anarcho-syndicalism, you think about, red and black, but then is it just going to be red and black, or can you combine more colors to it? And I think that's challenges that obviously when we design an identity we face, but there are also opportunities, to be creative, right? So the whole thing took 2-3 months. I don't know, I was just working on it, engaged.
I want to talk about how the installation came together. We've got a series of slides that show, first of all, at a very early design stage. But can I just have a quick show of hands? Who's actually seen this installation in place already? Anybody? Yeah, well, a good half of the people in it. So that's good. So the slide that you can see on screen now, Namoon, what's going on here?
I can explain.
Okay, go on.
That's Namoon on the left, Dr. Martin on the right. And that's basically, that's you. That's basically a paper model that we built just to, get a sense of the space and how it will work, how the dynamics will work within, the space itself. So, we wouldn't build things that wouldn't work, So I think this was a very important stage of, where we were taking decisions about how visitors will navigate through the space. In this case, you can see the entrance. So I was envisioning, okay, Dr. Martin on the left, on the right, Namoon on the left, and visitors come. There is because there's also a computer. Because in Anarres, computers, as you saw in the animation, computers give names to people. So basically, I imagine, for example, there will be a computer that Namoon will introduce to visitors, and visitors will be invited to take a badge and and have a name. I mean, obviously, it looks a little bit different from this now when you arrive to the space, but it was a very important stage where we made decisions about everything. Yeah.
So it's a classroom that's both on another planet, but also an anarchist classroom. So how did you go about thinking you were going to represent that?
Yeah, our priorities were, okay, it needs to look like a classroom of Anarres. And I think that's why, if you go to the space, if you didn't visit the space, you will go to the space and you will see there are a series of mountains that we hand draw that are huge, but they give this sort of sense that you are in another alien planet. And then we wanted to populate, and this is actually the next slide, we wanted to populate and give a sense of human touch to the space. So we hand draw, and again, everything was hand draw, so it's very rich, we wanted to give a sense of human to this, this human sense to the space. So we hand draw 100 and something faces. We end up not using all of them but we and I think this is where, because obviously if we think about an anarchist society, we think about the people and the people together and the act of sharing and the community working together towards similar goals. So, and that's why we use this sort of illustrations and the faces floating and giving this sense of almost like weirdness of an alien planet. I mean, obviously, we also designed a series of teaching resources apart from the animation that I think you can go through it, and that literally reflects also this anarchist way of thinking.
Well, let's have a look. We'll get to the classroom in a moment. But could we just have a look at the next couple of slides, because they show the landscape coming together. So just tell us briefly what we can see here.
This is basically, I always like to show a little bit of the process and the mess that is involved, because when you go to the space, obviously, things that they don't look that perfect. And I think it's important to show how things come together. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone here working, but everyone was behind the camera. Yeah, so we had so this is basically two of the mountains that we hand draw in the space, and we had to use ladders, so you can have a sense of scale from it. Yeah.
Can we see the next slide too?
So this is how the space. This is one of the views of the space. So here you can see. So you can have a sense of how. So you have these tables. You have a library designed by Noam that looks amazing, and you can have a sense of how rich the space is in terms of the illustration, but also you have these tables that they are designed to hold like 8 people, and they invite people to enjoy. But it also looks like a classroom. So you have like we populated the space also with Pravic sentences and little details about the book as well, like because Ursula Le Guin imagine and she imagined Anarres and Anarres. So we also have that in the space. Anyway, there's also some books in the library that you can see if you go to space.
So we can see here now that this is clearly the classroom. There are the tables there, as you just said, and there are 2 aspects of this. So Martin, you've been taking the night school, the literal night school part of it, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Amun, you've been taking classes for children as well. So do you want to take us through what happens in those classes?
Yeah, again, if you put the next picture on. Yeah, so this is like another image of like some of the teaching resources. So I think one of the most important bits about this exhibition is basically it is activated through the children and through the classes. So it's not mainly only like an exhibition for visitors to go through. I think that's a really special bit about it. Like once the children are in there, if you go to the next slide, they have to, so they're getting like taken to another place, and they have to kind of reimagining a different utopia, which is quite interesting by using as a designer different kind of resources and developing methodologies in which children, which are thinking differently than us, like to an easier way to think about anarchistic thoughts, ideas, and different social structures. So in this one you see one of the exercises, which are called the unknown known family tree. So basically the children are learning through this exercise that on Anarres is like a complete different family structure. And it's quite interesting because they are, of course they know their parents are parents and grandparents, blah, blah, blah. But here on Anarres, everyone is everyone. Everyone is a big family. So one child can have 10 siblings, one child can have 10 parents. And from the beginning on, the kids are a little bit stubborn and they're like, oh, I don't like siblings. I don't want to have 10 siblings. But then they're like, for example, yesterday I had one kid who was like, asked me like, so how would it be if I had 10 siblings? And he was like, I have 10 siblings. And I was like, okay, cool. But then also like things, there you really see like what the values are of the children is like very capitalist. Not very, but like they have a different value. And so if I ask them, okay, imagine you have 10 parents, and like some of the kids like, oh, I don't want 10 parents. But then they're like, maybe actually I would like to have 10 parents. I would get loads of presents. And then I'm like, oh, sorry, on Anarres there are no presents. There's no money. That's not going to happen. So that's like a really good thing. And then like by slowly like introducing them with this kind of questions, they kind of question themselves and the values and like the society we are living in, and also like what they are kind of learning from media and their teachers and education. It's like all, yeah. And the next slide shows, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so there's Joe. Unfortunately, he can't be here. He's like an amazing other workshop leader who's helping me quite a lot out. So this is like another one, which is beautifully written by Martin. So in this one, the children learn like Pravic, and so all these objects, like for example, this is like a cloth, are described in Pravic, For example, the shown things are the
Do
one
you want to do
things
it with me?
by me.
So the idea is that I see the picture, I see, for example, in this case, I see clothes. And Namuni is going to read what they mean in Pravic.
The shown things are the one things by me. And I know it now, but basically the kids have then to guess what is on the other side. And then, for example, another idea is locks are not on Anarres known things.
And this shows keys.
So it kind of transmits the idea of privilege through the objects, and then they have to kind of think about if they are shareable in the world of Anarres. But then also, like, it's always like a comparison to our current society. If things like locks are shareable in our society, yeah, which they can then decide. But usually they kind of, in the end, they're a little bit anarchistic than before. So I'm going quickly to the next one. So the final exercise is the clay models, and this is called the Museum of Obsolete Objects. So the children are creating clay models of things which doesn't exist on Anarres. And usually they are working on like brands like Nike, Adidas. Like another topic is money, quite a lot of money. It's always with money. It's like Visa cards and this kind of stuff. Yeah, but that's around the idea of it.
Just very quickly,
Go on, Martin.
today we had our first weapon, which is it's kind of hopeful for the kids of today.
So, Jess, if you'd put up the next slide, which is of the adult night school, which we'll talk about in a moment, Martin, but I mean, the key to all of this is Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed. Tell us about that book first of all. Tell us what it is.
It's basically the story of a scientist called Pravic and his life on Anarres. But he is also the first person in 7 generations since the settling of Anarres who wants to leave. And he wants to go back to the homeworld of Arras. And the book opens with him leaving Anarres and the reaction of the other people. A murder happens in the first few pages, and we learn very quickly that murderers are not punished on Anarres. They have no mechanism for punishment because it's an anarchist society. And we're left thinking, well, the murderer has to live with themselves. However, having gone to Arras, Pravic realises that it's not a good place to do his science. And he basically uses the facilities on Arras, develops his theory. Basically, he gets the answers he wants. And then after a riot, which his presence causes, in other words, there is still plenty of anarchists on Arras, and the minute he's there, they decide to rise up. So after the riot, he flees to the Terran embassy, the embassy for Earth. And his idea is then, through the rest of, well, it's the last few parts of the book, his idea becomes the property of the human race across the stars, which is what he wanted. And then the final chapter is that he returns to Anarres. And the book ends with him landing on Anarres and getting ready to go out. We don't know what will happen. How will people react to him coming back? Will it be as bad as him leaving? We don't know. The book ends.
In the context of the book, so what is Anarres? What's special about that moon?
Well, Anarres, as the video showed, was settled by people who had followed Odo, a female anarchist on the planet Arras. Basically, the original anarchists was just so numerous and just so difficult to control that the people of Arras decided the easiest way would be just to ship them off elsewhere, which is, we get flavours of that nowadays in the recent So anyway, they decided to ship them off elsewhere. Actually, I did do a little piece for the newsletter, the Utopia newsletter, on the day of the referendum, which asked the simple question, are lines across the land really a good way of saying where people should be? Anyway, what was I talking
Well,
about?
perhaps we'll talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, just we're talking about. So let's talk about how a little brief description of the political system on Anarres, how things work.
Yes, because it's anarchist, there is no political system as we would think of it. Everything is basically done by cooperation. And Ursula Le Guin shows the planet of Anarres going through a drought, a prolonged drought period, and how people work together to get through the drought. She also doesn't pull her punches. There are several characters in the book who are far from being good anarchists. But basically, she does demonstrate that even though Anarres has its problems, it does work as a society. And it is possible to have a society which doesn't have money. It is possible to have an anarchist society which works. But you have to start from a very different place from where we are here on Earth.
So we're going to talk about Pravic, the language, but you've got. You were going to read us an extract from the book, if you would do that first, and then we'll talk about.
Yes, this is the start of chapter 2, and to give you a little bit of scene. Shevek, who is the hero of the book, is 2 years old, so obviously not much involved in the scene in terms of speech. His two parents are Rulag, who is an engineer, an important engineer, and Palat, who is a less important engineer. So here we have Shevek in the nursery, and it starts, in a square window, in a white wall, is the clear blue sky. In the centre of the sky is the sun. There are 11 babies in the room, most of them cooped up in large padded pencots in pairs or trios and settling down with commotion and elocution into their naps. The two eldest remain at large, a fat, active one dismembering a pegboard, and a knobby one sitting in the square of yellow sunlight from the window, staring up at the sunbeam with an earnest and stupid expression. In the anteroom, the matron, a one-eyed woman with grey hair, confers with a tall, sad-looking man of 30. The mother's been posted to Abernay, the man says. She wants him to stay here. Shall we take him into the nursery full-time then, Palat? Yes, I'll be moving back into a dorm. Don't worry, he knows us all here, but surely Divlab will send you along after Rulag soon. Since your partners are both engineers. Yes, but it's the Central Institute of Engineering that wants her, see. I'm not that good. Rulag has a great work to do. The matron nodded and sighed. Even so, she said with energy, and did not say anything else. The father's gaze was on the knobby infant, who had not noticed his presence in the anteroom, being preoccupied with the light. The fat infant was, at this moment, coming towards the knobby one rapidly, though with a peculiar squatting gait caused by a damp and sagging diaper. He approached out of boredom or sociability, but once in the square of sunlight, he discovered it was warm there. He sat down heavily beside the knobby one, crowding him into the shade. The knobby one's blank rapture gave place at once to a scowl of rage. He pushed the fat one, shouting, "Go away!" The matron was there at once. She righted the fat one. "Chev, you aren't allowed to push other people." The knobby baby stood up. His face was a glare of sunlight and anger. His diapers were about to fall off. "Mine," he said in a high, ringing voice. "Mine, son." It is not yours, the one-eyed woman said with the mildness of utter certainty. Nothing is yours. It is to use. It is to share. If you will not share it, you cannot use it. And she picked up the knobby baby with a gentle, inexorable hands and set him aside out of the square of sunlight. The fat baby sat staring, indifferent. The knobby one shook all over, screamed, "Mine, son," and burst into tears of rage. The father picked him up and held him. "There now, Chev," he said. "Come on, you know you can't have things. What's wrong with you?" His voice was soft and shook as if he also was not far from tears. The thin, long, light child in his arms wept passionately.
Thank you, Martin. So, Pravic, the language, has been specifically designed to enable the anarchist system. Tell us about how that works.
Well, you saw there in the extract that the child saying "mine, son," and yet elsewhere Le Guin said that it's impossible to indicate ownership in Pravic. So it's kind of, how does the child do this? So we have to assume that Ursula Le Guin is doing things in English to shortcut things that were happening in Pravic. In Pravic, what we decided was you have to start with a form which suppresses the individual. So most utterances are in a passive form. As we saw, not Chevec made a tasty treat, but a tasty treat was made by Chevec. There are other effects. You can't say my, our, or we. You say instead not my coat, but the coat is the responsibility of the speaker. One of the strange things we decided on was that there were no pronouns. No pronouns at all. We got rid of the possessive pronouns, then we got rid of pronouns altogether. And we introduced instead what we call nominal or pronominal nouns. In other words, instead of saying I, you say the speaker. In fact, we eventually decided that you say a speaker for I, and the speaker means the last person who spoke. So it's a little difference happening there. It shows that Pravic, as it was developing like any language. It was developing its own idiosyncrasies. We actually had one person on the team. The word to be is pon, and so you say the thing is pone. But we found one person in the team liked saying pe, just taking out the on. So instead of saying was, it was po for him. So there we had an immediate, wonderful, idiosyncratic form, a dialect. So not only has Pravic got a full grammatical structure, and it's set out, there is a book, Teach Yourself Pravic, Learn to Speak Pravic. And in there are set out all the rules for speaking Pravic, but they're set out in a way of a normal English or, Earth phrase book. So the topic areas are basic grammar or whatever, then greetings. At the communal eating hall or refectory, not how you get a meal. At the depot, how you get things. At the dormitory, travel and directions, health, agreeing and disagreeing. So it's set out as a sort of phrase book for Pravic. There is also an alphabet which came late. The alphabet is not in the booklet, but it is on the website. There's a website as well. And you can see on the back an example of the Pravic alphabet. But so it's become quite a full language. More importantly, though, for the teaching has been Pravlish. And Pravlish is the mixture of English and Pravic. So instead of a full translation, for the evening classes, we give them two things. One is a little booklet with some ways of translating English into Pravic, just 7 simple rules, and another booklet where it gives a lot of examples, including the first page of the Dispossessed, translated completely into Pravlish, other quotes, and just to prove that Pravic is a real language, the last quote is from a monologue by Stanley Unwin, which is a bit unusual. I'll try to get the accent right. And after the battle were over, they found Harold so stately and grand, sitting there with an eye full of arrow, on his horse, with his hawk in his hand. And it is possible to translate that into Pravlish, and you get a pretty good answer. The final part of this leaflet, the bit where I get the students to do something themselves, is they have to take these phrases and translate them into Pravlish. And I start off with what seems like a simple phrase. I came, I saw, I conquered. Julius Caesar. When you try to translate that into Pravlish, you end up all over the place. And that's good. It shows that it is difficult to give these kind of order forms in Pravlish and therefore in Pravic. It shows that the language does have aspects which make it suitable for an anarchist society and not suitable for a non-anarchist society. So
how did you translate?
You want the translation? Okay. A finished thing was the fight. Harold, honest and good, was found by the unknown people. A horse was sat on with a hawk in the hand, with an arrow in the eye, by Harold.
Naman, how much of the, obviously not the Pravlish, but how much of the language did you use with the children in the classes?
So for all the exercises, there's a little bit of Pravlish into it. So like when they're getting the name badges, so we printed out lots of name badges. Like one of the first exercises is like saying hello, and this is like the day good, the name, for example, Shebek, name is. So then they have to kind of greet each other in this way. And then for the family tree structure, they have to use their own name, or they have to say the speaker is the sibling of the other person. Mm-hmm. So they're trying, because Pravlish embodies actually all the values, so it's quite interesting how they kind of change it as well into it. So they're embodied into it.
And Nestor, I asked you about the design of the installation and how the classroom and the landscape was formed by the planet and the fact that it was an anarchist classroom. But what about the language itself? How were you able to sort of incorporate some aspect of the language into the design?
Yeah. So the font, for example, the typeface was specifically designed for this installation. For example, the typeface doesn't have capitals. It doesn't have. So if you type, I'll make available the font, but if you type a capital with a typeface, it will say profiteer, which is a very insulting word in Anarres. So, for example, it doesn't have descendants or it doesn't have descendants or ascendants, which is those little legs that you see up and down. And I think so that's one of the aspects that this whole anarchist way of thinking formed and the language informed the designs.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the inventing the language. As you said, Ursula Le Guin obviously went so far, and you basically created a whole dictionary basically of the language. How do you do that?
Well, as part of my teaching, I teach a module called The Making of Language, where the student project is actually to create their own language. So this gave me an ideal workshop as part of teaching them how to create a language. I was constantly feeding them bits of Pravic and getting their comments back as to, does this really work, sir? Not sir, of course. So I was using my students, with their permission, to actually generate Pravic. So I can't really say Pravic was just my work. The students all fed into it. And basically, Pravic went through 5 very distinct evolutions. And as I say, even at the final evolution, there were people producing dialects out of it. I mean, the Académie Française would be having kittens by now.
We should say something about anarchism, I guess. So, this installation, the ideas of Utopia and the literary anarchism of Anarres, of the Dispossessed, how does that sort of, what can we learn from that? How does that fit into types of anarchism that exist on Terra? What, do you want to start, Martin? I think we can all answer answer this question. But
well, I have to say, I myself am not an anarchist, although having worked on this project, I have become a lot more sympathetic to the ideas in it. Like some of the kids in the day classroom, I have stopping points where I can see, yes, you can go beyond that stopping point, but Martin Edwards is not going to go beyond that stopping point. So I will never be a good anarchist. But there's something in the book which makes it real. It makes it possible. It tells you that it's not going to be good, it's not going to be perfect. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not going to be Utopia. But it is going to work.
Well, perhaps a better question for yourself then, before we carry on, is in what ways, we talked about how Pravic is designed to enable the anarchic society to function. But obviously there are ways in which our own language is structured to control the sort of social structure. Tell us about how that works in some ways.
I'm reading a book, or nearly finished a book, by James Pennebaker, which talks about the use of pronouns in English. And he shows how the use of pronouns, from the use of pronouns by a person, you can dictate their social role, whether they're acting as a boss or as a servant. You can understand sometimes their gender role. So in English, we are subconsciously producing these versions of English which match our particular role at a particular time. And that's something we wanted to avoid in Pravic and Pravlish, that there should be this way of using the language to define your social hierarchical role. So the idea of putting the subject at the end was actually to suppress part of this. The idea of not using little words like pronouns, but making them bigger, making them more important in the minds of the user. This was to stop them being used subconsciously to create a social structure just by the way you were talking. So it is linguistically informed, Pravic, and we hope that it can actually generate a more anarchistic way of talking.
Nestor, so again, what are the things that you're talking about in this installation that could sort of feed into real life ideas of anarchism?
I think, for example, the act of sharing, which is in a society that we live nowadays, sharing is is taken very carefully. Like you share things, for example, with your relatives, but when it comes to all the people that you don't know, for example, that sharing element is a little bit more difficult. So I think, for example, the act of sharing is something that is perhaps within the anarchist society one of the most important ones, and I think it's very visible within the installation itself. Yeah.
And Namoon, what do you think why the society can learn from the things you've done with this installation?
So one of the final exercises I'm doing is this role play where I ask them, what do you think can be cast, be shareable? And they have to decide on like, I'm agreeing, I'm not agreeing. And then it depends on how the kids are like in the mood. But one of the final question I'm asking is, could you imagine to live on Anarres? And then there are classes where they're not at all agreeing to it, and they're like, oh my god, I'm never sharing anything, I don't like this, I will have everything on my own, I love my possessions. But then today I had an amazing class who went all to the agreeing side, but I had to kind of negotiate with them. So I said, like, how about a year? They're like, no. How about 3 months? No. But they agreed to 1 month going to Anarres, to live there, to learn what it means to share everything, come back and teach other young people and elderlies, because they said elderlies don't know about it. And I thought, yeah, and I was like, wow, cool. That's like brilliant to kind of end a class in that way. And I think that's what anarchism is for me, to kind of get a little bit anarchistic thoughts into the children.
They all caught wind of the idea that it's the elderlies that voted for Brexit.
Yeah, very smart about it. Yeah.
We're going to finish in a moment, and we're going to come to the audience for questions, so be thinking about that. But before we do, again, one question to all three of you. The idea of these Paths to Utopia events is collaborations between artists, academics, scientists. So how have you all found that collaboration? How has that worked for you? I'll start with you, Namoon, and we'll go in that direction.
To be honest, we talked about it yesterday, when it was very, like, even the work, how we worked together was very anarchistic. It was like over Skype, and then loads of documents. Like, we have an Evernote file which is full of like million documents, and like really, there Namoon, there Anka, there Noam, and then some emails to Andy. It was like very chaotic, but then also very structured. So I think
you're right. I don't know if you know the online platform called Evernote, is that right? So I think that was the center, because obviously Onkar and Noam especially wasn't here in the UK because he's living in Rotterdam, and Onkar was traveling because he's moving. So we had to share things somehow in one space, and obviously with Martin as well. So we use Evernote, this platform, to do that. Obviously, at some point, I don't know how many notes we have there, like 200, an incredible amount of notes, but very interesting, and we can always go there and visit them. And I think you're right as well. The way that we worked was very anarchistic in the way that we were like, oh yeah, do an animation. And I was like, yeah, I'll do an animation like this. Then obviously we will gather together and making decisions all together. And I think most of the decisions, at least from my side, it wasn't only my decisions, where it was like all taken as a group. And also, if you go to the space, although we built, we had a structure, we had an idea of how the installation, of how we wanted the installation. When we arrived to the space, as I said, things changed, and we don't need that. Oh, we do need that. We kind of took things as they came.
Martin, how did you find collaborating with these artists?
Warning to social scientists everywhere: if you collaborate with artists, you will certainly enjoy the experience, but boy, they will work you hard. I originally thought I was just on board to do the language, but I've taken part in the day school and I've done the night schools, and I've enjoyed every second. But at the end of this week, I am knackered.
That's a good point for us to finish. So can I take some questions? There is a microphone. Yes, we've got a roving microphone. If anybody has a question? The lady here at the front.
I've got 2 questions. I don't want to hog things, but my questions, the first one is, it's all about the way that you structured the language. So the two questions go together. The first one is, how did you deal with structuring emotions? I'm thinking because in Irish you say the sadness is upon me rather than I am sad. Was there anything analogous in Pravic? And secondly, it seemed to me from what you've been explaining that the language has evolved to be somewhat object-oriented. And I was wondering if you could maybe expand on that and comment on it a little bit, just so that we can understand. I'm quite interested in object-oriented ontologies, and so I was wondering, is there a way that the agency of the object is kind of augmented by the way that you've structured the language and moving the person subject to a less prominent position?
The idea of, well, let's start with the emotion thing first. Yes, it does take an Irish form, and indeed similar form in Spanish and I believe in Urdu as well, of you don't say I am angry, you say anger is within me, or I have anger. You can't say have in Pravic, but that you can say it in Urdu. So it puts the emotion after the involvement of the person. So it kind of mitigates the emotion. The emotions are always mitigated. It's more important that people deal in facts rather than feelings. And of course, the foregrounding of the object makes people deal more in facts. I mean, there are all kinds of little odds and ends of Pravic which I haven't got into, such as there are 3 negatives. You can say, no, this is not true. You can say, no, I don't believe this is true. And no, this doesn't quite seem to be true. So reducing level of certainty in there. And then there are other forms. There are several forms of we. Obviously not we, but more us. And so you can differentiate, as you can in BSL, between we, meaning me and someone else, not you, and we, meaning me and you, and we, me, you and our group, and we, it's that way, which is me and my group, but not you. And you also have the universal we, which you don't have in BSL, which is sort of, everyone, but at the same time no one. So there are lots of little things in Pravic which are there just to make it difficult to egoize. That's a word that comes in the book. And egoizing is basically just trying to put yourself up as the central figure rather than the event. So that was one of the things that drove us on that. Whether it works or not, well, time will tell, I suppose.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, there's a couple. So if we could go to this chap on this side first of all, and then we'll come back to you. And then, did you do both of your questions then? You did, okay, so we'll just do these two.
Right, so one of the focuses of the exhibition seems to be on education. I was wondering if, A, how that's addressed in the book, and secondly, how the groups have responded to the sort of the function of education as it's kind of shifted towards something which is far more about kind of ownership and kind of raising your own capital or investing in yourself. I was wondering if there was kind of any, how that's addressed in the book, and also how the children perhaps responded to that, the function of their education.
I can't answer everything. Well, I'll say how it's addressed in the book. Basically, the classroom space, I have to say, the classroom space in night school, I just wish that there were more classroom spaces like that throughout King's. Some of the classrooms I teach in, well, shall we say I would prefer to teach in night school. So that, and they've caught, the artists have caught the feeling of teaching on Anarres, which is, it's not about the teacher. The teacher's not stood up there as we are, behind a barrier with the blackboard or whiteboard or whatever. The only way you can teach in that classroom is to wander round. You cannot teach standing still. You cannot teach from one position in the classroom. You have to keep wandering round. And that just keeps the whole thing, it's no longer the teacher's area and the student's area, it's everyone's area. Everyone is using the area as they wish. So that's what the book describes. That's, I think, what the artists have given us. And yeah, we've used it very gratefully. But Namoon, how have you found it?
I kind of felt that, so when the children are coming, or like in general the classes when we are doing the workshops, they are under a huge pressure. They're like so afraid of failing in everything. So it's quite nice to give them the feeling of it doesn't matter if you fail or like doing some errors or whatever. And also like I feel like education or the curriculum in general in schools is very much about, I don't know, like about learning and like success in learning, going to the university. But what is like quite often missing out, I think, are social structures or like social and values, which some of the children don't learn from home, or like have a complete different value system. And I believe actually education should be taught way more. And it kind of, all the exercises shifted in this direction of giving them a different, or like a possibility to imagine or like being curious about a different value system as we are living in. I think that was really, really brilliant. And that's really good, like to have these classes, and they, I think, see it, the teachers are seeing it, the children are getting out with a different feeling.
I think we've just got time for just one more then to this gentleman here.
I've actually got two questions.
Take the microphone.
So I'm not familiar with the book, so I'm sorry if my questions are a bit basic, but my first question is, was Pravic also the language spoken on Anarres? And if that's not the case, then how does the development of it fit into the timeline of the migration and the development of the new society? So is there a kind of chicken and egg question there? And then my other question was, from what I've picked up, in the society on Anarres, the computer seems to play quite an important role in terms of taking decisions. So my questions there are, what happens if the computer gets something wrong, or if somebody starts to question the authority of the computer? And, you know, following on from that, how does that fit with the whole concept of anarchy?
Very nice question.
Well, the first question about the history of language I'll deal with, and then I'll weasel out of the second question, which is much harder. In terms of the history of the language, 7 generations before the book, the people of Anarres, the anarchists of Anarres, moved to the moon, Anarres. One of those people is a guy called Pravic, and he actually creates Pravic as a language using a computer model and basing the whole language from the computer. And so Pravic is an artificial language. And Le Guin talks about the first generation speaking Pravic as a second language. The languages of Anarres has got loads and loads of different languages, just like Earth has. But the main one in the book is from the part of Anarres, which is I've forgotten the name of the country. This capital city is Aio, and clearly it's a language which is just full of vowels, uses vowels all the time. I didn't have to worry about that language though, although someone has produced that language elsewhere on the internet. But she also says how it's full of exceptional cases, unusual forms. In other words, it's a bit like English, it's just growed. Whereas, of course, on the other hand, you've got Pravic, which was designed. However, clearly, just as our version of Pravic moved almost immediately and changed and dialectized, I imagine that also must happen on the moon. But because they cooperate with each other, the idea is that they cooperate in keeping the language communicable between each other. It doesn't diverge into different languages. So yes, it's kind of half explained in the book, like a lot of the book. But that's not what the book is about. That's a side issue for the book. It just happens to be a main issue for us in the night school.
Nestor, what happens if the computer goes wrong?
So the computers, according to the book, are non-partition. I think that's how they call it, which means that are almost incorruptible.
Almost.
So that's if the computer goes wrong, I mean, I would say that we would have to imagine what would happen, because actually, as you said, computers play an important role, because computers, they give tasks to people, they attribute the names, but the society, as far as the book goes, built this very well-designed computer. So I don't really know. Do you have? If a computer goes wrong, I think it's an anarchist society, so people will have to accept it.
I guess so, but I think it's like quite a symbolic meaning of the computer itself. It's like because there's no authority, and it kind of the computer replaces the authority and tries to make everything fair. But I guess it's the same as with us. If we don't have a government, what would happen? So I guess it's the same situation there.
I imagine we could write a book on that.
That was my question. I mean, is that true anarchy? Because obviously they don't have a human government, but they fully accept the authority of this computer that replaces the government. So they're still governed by someone, even if that person's not a human. So is that really true anarchy?
Yeah, but as Martin mentioned before, I think like when Ursula Le Guin wrote the book, she didn't, well, at least in my view, she didn't wanted to create an ideal society. So this society has some more fragile, let's say, things on it. Like, for example, there's the computer, for example, which almost kind of rules the society itself. But there's also an institution, or this there's something called PDC, I think. So, in the PDC is an institution that basically it's a publisher, and publish, like, for example, books, and nothing can be published on Anarres without going through the PDC. So it's a sort of, way of, a non-anarchist way of dealing with things. So I don't think she wanted to, illustrate anarchism as an ideal society.
I think Ursula Le Guin would immediately jump on your choice of words there, true anarchy. And she would probably say there is no such thing as true anarchy. And just give you a quote from Ursula Le Guin, not from the book, this is elsewhere. She says, "What is an anarchist? One who, choosing, accepts the responsibility of choice. On Anarres, they have chosen to use the computer. They accept the responsibilities that places on them about that choice." So I hope that answers your question.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. So you'll be aware of this if you're watching it online, that this event is being live streamed by This Is Tomorrow, the online art magazine, and that video will be available on the King's website probably for about next Monday, and if you want to relive this or share it, or if you came in a little bit late, you can find it at kcl.ac.uk/Utopia 2016. And just finally to say, if you would show your appreciation for Martin, Nestor and the Moon, and thank you for coming.